Good morning, PASW clients and staff, friends joining us. Welcome to Monday's class. Hope you guys had a nice, restful weekend, and I hope you're ready to get started with some good work I have cut out for us this week. So last Monday, we talked about Amadeus, right? We talked about Mozart, and I hope you guys thought about what your oboe is or in life. What's the thing that drives you, that makes life worth living? So I hope I did get some personal comments, so that was nice. But if you want to write them in the YouTube comments, that'd be great too. And you know what? If it's something that you need more time to think about, perhaps it takes a lifetime to think of what really it makes life worth living sometimes, or maybe it goes through different oboes. Anyway. So that was Mozart. So now we're going to go a few years later, a little bit move forward into Beethoven. Yes, it's inevitable that we would get to Beethoven. And so Beethoven's born in 1770. So he's alive for about 20 years while Mozart's alive. But there's no evidence that says that either of them met. I know, obviously, Beethoven was hugely influenced by Mozart and by Haydn and Bach, of course, other composers before him. But Beethoven's interesting. He's, again, I'm trying to bring light to some of these very dark stories and people's that had very dark lives. Not bring light to it, but not dwell on it. But Beethoven was a very troubled person, probably to say the least. And there's always talk of, does suffering always, make the artist better, or there's always that kind of theory going around. But we'll talk about Beethoven. Obviously, we all know he's a genius and he's a composer, but let's talk about some other elements of that might be more interesting, rather than just kind of listing off, facts as a childhood prodigy. Let's just go through this together. It took me a while to understand Beethoven. I'll be the first to admit that I never liked Beethoven that much. I knew of his greatest works. I knew of Ode to Joy, and that's genius. I knew Moonlight Sonata. Genius. I knew Beethoven's Fifth. Genius. I knew Für Elise. He was a prodigy and had several brothers, and his father was an alcoholic and would beat him when he would play the wrong notes as he was practicing piano or keyboard, and he hated his father. But started making money pretty early on. Around 18, he was making money for the whole family as a musician, as somebody that would improvise on the piano. And it's funny because when I mentioned to Mozart's thing that the piano was kind of becoming a little bit more of a mainstream instrument. Obviously, Mozart had piano concertos, but the harpsichord, clavichord, all these other keyboard things. Beethoven was one of the first composers to really utilize solely the piano as his instrument for composition and for concertos and for sonatas. Obviously, the famous Moonlight Sonata, which was not ever called the Moonlight Sonata. It was attributed after his death. It was simply just Piano Sonata number 14. But that doesn't sell as many tickets. It's a little bit more romantic, and he wrote it for a woman. He didn't have a great love life. Never married. Never had any kids. Was in love with many women that didn't reciprocate or didn't work out, or something like that, or didn't. Phone was disconnected or something like that. So as he's already making a really a pretty good salary living as a composer, he begins losing his hearing in his 20s, and we all know that Beethoven was deaf. Now, obviously, he wasn't born deaf, but in his 20s he starts losing his hearing, and there's some mystery about how that happened. Was it and the consensus is what I've sort of discovered is that it was probably lead poisoning. Now, when he died, somebody took a lock of his hair, pretty substantial lock. They cut it off him off his dead body, and it's sold for 35,000 pounds, I think a year ago or something like that. But because of that, it opened up a lot of insight into Beethoven's DNA, and because of this hair, they think that there might have been lead poisoning is the lead role into the cause of his hearing loss. So once Beethoven's 45, he's completely deaf. So this is the last 11 years of his life. So when you think of that, what's the irony of what God would give somebody? What's the most important thing for a composer? His ears, right? And to take that away is horrible. What's the worst that for a painter? His eyes, right? Not seeing something. Yet, because of Beethoven's training and brilliance, genius helps too, but because of his training and perfect pitch and all those years of writing, he could hear the music in his head. So he knew how it sounded. Now, that's not justification for, okay, well, that's just good. That's good enough for him then, right? No, it's it must have been devastating. And also, we hear a sense of anger, and whether it's anger toward him, toward God, if he believed in God, toward society of some sort of, and rightly so. I mean, who wouldn't be outraged that why am I going deaf when he had all these other ailments too? The list was so long I didn't even want to say it because it's just ridiculous. I mean, he was just a sickly. I mean, people back then were, but he was just a very sickly person. And then to throw this deafness on top of it, of course you're going to be mad at life. I mean, that's just human nature to be. And so from his early piano sonatas and symphonies toward the end of his life, his pieces become darker. Now, darker doesn't always mean better, but I think if we look at some of the pieces from the beginning to the end, there's something more that we can uncover. So it was really the string quartets, particularly the late string quartets of Beethoven, that I fell in love with. That I started not understanding, but I was intrigued and wanting to learn more about him. And particularly when I came across his famous fugue, which was way too far out there, that his publisher said it cannot go into the string quartet as a movement. It's got to be separate. No one's gonna buy that. I mean, they must have thought he was crazy when he wrote this thing, and he was deaf, and so they probably thought these were all mistakes. It's considered one of the greatest pieces today, his great fugue. It's the great fugue, it's called. But let's back up a little bit. So if he's completely deaf in his 40s, how long can you keep up that charade of pretending that you're not deaf to people that are going to hire you to give you money how often can you make that work? I mean, it's horrible, because and so he would have to start giving up public, performing in public, and he would only see select friends, and he would mostly start communicating in notebooks, which we have today. And I think he was probably already introverted, but then this deafness really forced him to probably become insular and very, very, even more private. So there were probably so many times when Beethoven wanted to give up because of this disability. And I mean, what could be more, appropriate for us to be talking about? A performer with a disability, with this increasing deafness. And what I want to talk to you about is something very, very important, that what Beethoven did, and it's called the Heiligenstadt Testament, okay? Heiligenstadt's not there anymore. It's Vienna. Today it's a part of Vienna. But it was a letter written by Beethoven to his brothers, Karl and Johann, and in 1802. So this is about 20 years before he dies. He dies at 56, which is young now, but that's probably, for his chronic illnesses, that probably wasn't that young. But he writes this Heiligenstadt Testament, and in it he really, and he didn't send the letter ever. It stayed with him until he died. It was found in his papers after his death in 1827, and he dies after his death. So what he says in this is kind of this confession, and he says, "I would have ended my life. It was only my art that held me back. And it seemed to me impossible to leave the world until I had brought forth all that I felt was within me." What do you think about that? He was going to kill himself, but he had more work to do. Something in him, his will, a higher power, something in him said, there's more work to be done, and I have to give it to the world. Now you could say, well, that's the huge ego, and you'd be right. He probably did have a huge ego, but guess what? We're talking about him today. He did have a lot of work to do, and that work is something that we're listening to and enjoying and talking about on this beautiful sunny day right now. We're still, hundreds of years later, we're still talking about him. So, I mean, it's such a there's some will, and we see it in you guys and the clients, the staff does. That you guys keep moving on. You can't give up. I know that sounds corny, but there's something in you guys, in all of us, that tells us we have to stay with this game. We have to stay in this. Somehow we got to do it. You wake up, you show up, you go to work, you practice, you do these things even when you don't want to do them. And that's whether you have a disability, whether you don't have one. So the fact that this Heiligenstadt, this letter, which he never sent to anybody, was this confession and this vulnerability and this sort of promise to his brothers and to the world that there's work for me to be done here. Truly remarkable and heartbreaking. So isn't there work for all of us to be done here? Isn't there work for us to do now? It was only my art that held me back. It seemed to me impossible to leave the world until I had brought forth all that I felt was within me. I'm stunned. I still can't. I think it's so beautiful. So we have a lot of work to do in our lives, and that art, whether it be composing, painting, writing, talking to somebody that needs to listen to, helping somebody on the street, being kind to somebody, all of those are in some ways motions of art. Let it be that is why life is work, why we have work to do here. Well, we need to keep doing good work here. So what a genius he was. And thank you for listening. So let's keep that in mind. What work do we have left? We have a lot of work to do here. Okay. Love you guys. See you tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. I forgot to give you your homework assignment for the week. After all that beautiful Beethoven and all that emotion, I it slipped my mind. Yes, I'm sorry, but there's homework. We're going to do another film scoring project because you guys did so great on the last one. I was so proud of you. Uh, I think this scene will be very, very fun. So I want you to do the same thing. Find a piece of music or create something original and put it to the scene. If you can just tell me on the link below the video, this video, or you can email it to me, whatever's best. And then if there's a particular section, just tell me, I want this to start at 3 minutes and 50 seconds or something like that. And I'd be happy to embed the audio and marry it to the picture for you because I think these are very fun, very cool to do. So take a look at this scene right now, and then we'll talk about it.
Oh!
So that scene is from the very famous The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, directed by Sergio Leone, and this is 1966. And obviously, I've taken the music out. I don't know where it begins. I don't know where it starts, where it ends. I mean, I do know, but you know what I'm saying. So a lot of long shots, a lot of close-ups, a lot of tension, violence, gunfights. I want you guys to come up with something. It can be funny. It can be, you know, anything, but take it seriously. It's like with the saber dances of Cacciatorian. That was funny, but they could have been going to a circus in the desert. So yeah, so take it seriously, but there's no right or wrong answer. So come back and look at this. I'll see if I can upload just this. I'm sure I can to YouTube, just so you have reference of this. But this is obviously the movie stripped without the soundtrack. So I want you to put in the soundtrack for Friday, and so start today or this week, and send them to me by Thursday, the latest. and I'll put it up, and we'll see the results on Friday. Okay, all right. Good luck. Can't wait to see what you come up with. Bye.